Hey guys, it's Brandy Holloway with the Burn Podcast, and I am super excited to be back live with you guys. It's been so long, and I get to see this beautiful woman's face while we do this today. So I want you guys to welcome Makenzie Jene, and I'm literally going to turn the floor right over to her as far as introducing herself. And then we're going to talk a little bit about how we met, and then we're gonna dive into burning some stuff down today. So welcome to the Burn Podcast, beautiful. It's so glad to have you here. And
Thank you.
So tell us a little bit about you, what you're doing, how you're making an impact.
Man, okay. Well, I'm Makenzie Jene, and obviously we met on TikTok. I think that part of our connection was not just our heart and the things that we care about and are passionate for, but also I'm a single mom, divorced, single mother of 2 kids, and kind of living that life and trying to like pave the way for myself and for them. And so, yeah, I am working right now as a social media marketer for a social media company that I love my job, and I think I'm still maybe like trying to define like who I am and the impact I'm trying to make in the world. It's probably some of what we'll talk about today, but I'm a storyteller, and I feel like what's been like spoken to me like by my inner being recently is that I'm like an intuitive encourager. So my work and the things that I want to do in the world have to do with encouraging and loving people and humanity, trying to lead them toward their true authentic selves, and loving their true authentic selves through storytelling.
I love that. I love that. And I I think that's why we connected so well, because I've always, even though I didn't know at the time, was a storyteller. And that's a lot of what I wanted to really center this podcast around, because as I started to write my book, which is called Bullshit, the Stories We Tell Ourselves,
Cool.
is realizing how we adapt and how we cope as we go through all these things in life, and the stories that we tell ourselves, and then realizing that we hold the power to also rewrite those stories. And really where the truth is. I mean, I've done a lot of self-discovery with all of those things. So, and I think the biggest thing, so let's start with, I think one of the biggest things I want to talk about is I've seen so many people rise up during this last year and a half that we've been, going through pandemic and all of these crazy changes. And then I've seen a lot of people pivot completely. This has been a huge year for everyone. I think, to whether they liked it or not, they were going to have to do some self-discovery for sure.
We were made to do that. Yeah.
Right. So what were some things that you really found that you had to go through this past year with all of that going on, and, how you're burning through that?
Yeah. I honestly, it's kind of crazy that the pandemic hit when it did, because I felt like I was already at this extremely pivotal, like transformational point in my life. I had obviously, like I just had gone through a divorce. It's been like 4 years. And then after that, I was in a 2.5 year long relationship with someone that I thought was like the love of my life. I thought I was going to be with this person forever. And just the dynamic of the relationship was something, it was very much that I've never felt this way before type of feeling, like this must be what it's supposed to be like, after having experienced so much trauma relationally before and coming out of that being like, oh, this is what it's supposed to be, right? And then I had my heart shattered for various reasons in that relationship. And it was part of my, what I call a spiritual awakening. So for me, I think within that relationship, I was already coming to terms with a lot of myself and my adult trauma, and like healing that needed to be like taking place, but trying to do that within the confines of a relationship that wasn't working. And then the ending of that relationship was something that, it was a moment for me that was like, this either makes you or breaks you, honey. Like you either do this life and you really like face yourself and do that, or you shrink and you fall inward into the pain. And so I was going through that right when they were like, cool, now do that in your room with no one else, no outside contact, and fear surrounding like your health and the health of your family.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I mean, it was like already that for me. And then I was physically forced inside my home, and I've been unbelievably grateful for the time. For me, it's been in all of the obvious ways, very challenging. But I already said yes to my growth and said yes to my healing. So it was like, okay, no takesies, backsies.
Right. So,
Yeah.
so even with that being said, like, how did you even get to a place where you knew that what prompted that I need to go all in right now? And I specifically heard you say fall into the pain, which I find interesting because I've been studying trauma, pain,
Mm,
suffering, all of those things because I watch people who choose to sit in it, and it
yeah.
is a choice.
Yeah.
And then I watch someone, like you, and you're like, okay, let's do this. So how did you even how were you able to even get to that point?
I got tired, I think. I think I got really tired of my own bullshit. I really do think that. It was like, um, I started to see, and also I have kids, so that adds a lot to that life and my choice to do
Yes.
that, right? It's like, okay, who are you gonna be, And so I saw myself living in these patterns, and I started to realize it's comfortable here a little bit to sulk in this, or like I have an excuse almost to, I mean, just with what was going on with me personally, but also my whole life. I mean, I have a life of traumatic events. So my people close to me say your life is like a series of unfortunate events. And it's funny because it's true, but I was like allowing that to be my narrative and just be like, yeah, like this is me, instead of like what you're saying, taking that and rewriting it. And so I was like tired of feeling, I think maybe I was noticing the people in my life also becoming tired of the narrative, but wanting to be supportive. And so all of that felt lonely to me. And I felt lonely with myself. And so once I started feeling that, I was like, you know, this is the turning point to make that choice. And it was just the obvious one for me. It was like, this is the right way. I'm tired of living like this. And so I did. Either way was going to be challenging,
Yeah.
right? Like at this point, it was like my nest wasn't feathered anymore. And so I was like, I either sit in here and feel this pain, or I go through the challenges of like learning to fly. And that's I just chose that.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's funny going back to pain and suffering and all of these things. And I don't know about your background, which, I want you to touch on that. But for me, I feel like I almost learned that from people as I was growing up, right? So
Yeah.
they would drag things out. They would hold on to these grudges and this resentment and all of these things. And all it did, as we know now, is it crushes you internally, and it doesn't do anything else externally other than pushing people away from you, right?
Right.
And I I had this profound moment. I have probably listened to the 7 Spiritual Laws of Success by Deepak Chopra. I probably listened to it, no joke, over the years 100 times, because I can listen to
Taking
it
note.
and every single time, it's just something it peels a layer. And when he's talking about like the law of detachment is one of the things. But I remember I was listening and I went to go write that day, and I said, sometimes we build a tolerance for pain that should have never been tolerated.
Yeah.
And we didn't know that because we were taught that. So for me, in relationships, specifically romantic relationships, with men, I had the same thing. The narrative was there, right? Oh, well, that's just how it is, or, this is all I deserve, or whatever it was that I was telling myself. And unfortunately for me, it took me 40 years, which is why I was like, fuck that. I'm going to go on a mission to help other women and men, not just, and I don't put anybody in a boat, right?
Yeah.
But I'm like, I'll help any person that wants to break that narrative, that wants to break that story down and edit it and rewrite it. And so, do you feel like you learned to be that way from outside sources, which we never have to name them here? Or, is that just who you were?
Do you mean my past self? Yeah, both. Well, I always say both because we always have a choice to some extent in who we are,
Mhm.
in my opinion. But a lot of it was learned. Everything that you're saying resonates with me because whether or not it was taught to me outright, I feel like that's the thing, is that the majority of my life was taught by what I watched, what I saw going on, not by someone actually, mentoring me through life, right? Or raising me up in a very specific way. It was more just I lived and I had caretakers and I watched them live their lives. And this isn't to say I didn't have good relationships. I had a great relationship, with my dad growing up, and I have a great relationship with both my parents now. But there were challenges in where they were at in their phase of life when I was being raised, when I was a little girl, and watching that influenced a lot of how I saw people and relationships and how life should feel and look, and what things should be, or what it was even capable of being. I think that it was more, I saw the limitations of life really early on, and that influenced a lot of my worldview moving forward. It was like, this is what family looks like. This is what relationships look like. So when I had them myself, I was like, well, this sucks, but it's normal. Or like, what else is there, really? Because I never saw anything else. So yeah, I learned a lot of it.
Break that down
For
some
sure.
more. It's interesting. I love the way you put that, the limitations were there, because now you're a mother and you have little ones that you're influencing with, whether we like it or not. We still have we have our beliefs as they evolve and they shift, but we still have ours. And I don't know about you, but like, I almost put too much pressure on myself. I do put too much pressure on myself a lot of times with what I'm saying and how I'm acting and how I'm responding, because I know that they're going to do what I do, not what I say.
So real.
And
Yes.
I have specifically limited contact with them, with people that I know have extremely limited, belief systems. And I'm never even talking about obviously politics, religion, or anything like that, but just living life, right?
Yeah.
And what it could be, and limiting your opportunities, based on some belief system that really has been handed down. When I talk about generational crime, it's like you just don't even know sometimes how. And I was like, I'm going to break that curse. So how do you, knowing where you were then as a child, and that you were receiving all these belief systems, right? And they were limiting you then. This is what you saw. Not that anyone did that in any ill will, but now that you're a mother,
right?
What are you really instilling in your kiddos to help them maybe not, deal with those as many limitations, or know that they can break through those?
Yeah. So for me, I think it's right now, especially, I think about this. It's probably one of the main things that I think about is what we're talking about, parenting and how I'm influencing my children. And awareness is a word that comes up with me when I think about this a lot, and especially when I'm feeling hard on myself. And, I do a lot of prayer and meditation. It's just part of like my lifestyle. And so I bring this into that time because I have a squirrel brain that's like, I give you no time to do anything but overthink. And so when I do that and I quiet my mind and I try to, just hold this intention within myself, the word that comes up within me.
I'm still here. Keep going.
You are? Okay. Okay, great. We had a glitch. So the word that comes up within me is awareness. And the difference is that I think, and thankfully so, I have grown in my awareness of the fact that I do influence my children. So that's not to put pressure on myself, because I do that mostly, or to be hard on myself, to let myself be human. But I never experienced a lot of things that my children experience in their relationship with me, in the sense that I'm open and vulnerable with them about life now as they're young. My kids are 5 and 6, right? And so we talk about these things. We talk about our humanity. We talk about our emotions. We put language to our experiences, things like that. And so do I think I'm perfect, or that they're not going to grow up and be like, I wish that mom had done this differently? I'm certain that they will, right? That they will have things that they have grown beyond, right? Like, but it's not going to be like what you're saying, which also resonates with me so hard, as generational curses. I believe truthfully with all of my being that I am the person in my family lineage who's breaking that. And that's not to like pat myself on the back. It's more just a calling and the feeling that I have inside of myself, that I think that's part of my calling as a human being, is to break that. And so my kids will ride on my back, and they will lift themselves up when they go and have their own families and be like, oh, this is what I've learned. Love my mom, but I've learned these things. We're going to do it differently. But it's all awareness and speaking, and not being afraid to fail openly. A lot of the trauma that I experienced was because my caretakers were trying to shield me from their brokenness, which understandably so. We all want to shield the people that we love, especially our children, from our brokenness. But there's I think part of the beauty in parenting for me is letting my children see that and see how I work through that, and sharing that with them. And so hopefully what they see is someone who's willing to process life openly, and that maybe they'll be able to do that differently as they're older, and ask for help and ask questions and live out loud instead of live quietly.
Love that. Yeah.
Yeah.
I tell my kids, you know, I'm doing my best. This is what I know to do today. Tomorrow I may know better. And, you know, there's no manual, and, you know, I do pay attention to the language that I use. And, I mean, I still catch myself all the time, you know, just
Yes.
saying, like, I even try not to say like something's expensive.
Yeah.
Think about
It's a huge one.
you know, money mindset, because I grew up so poor.
Yeah.
I still find myself saying, you know, those things. And then especially when it comes to, you know, relationships, because it's such a different, you know, my two different dads with my children,
Yeah.
you know, very traumatic situations, and both coming out of both, have two beautiful children. So,
Of course.
I mean, I'm, you know, love that. But, you know, when you go through the process of recording those happenings, doing podcasts, writing books, writing blogs, I know one day there's you know, they may see this. And even in that language, I try to make sure that I'm like, this is how I feel.
Yeah.
Right. This is my truth. Now there's another side to every truth. When there's two people, there's two truths, right? There's their truth and there's our truth. And as I say, it's in between. So what is something, you know, I feel like we've talked really more about, you know, parenting, single parenting, going through these things, how we're speaking to our children, the language that we're using. So I think a lot of parents, I know a lot that I've personally talked to, some of them, their kids have had a really hard time with, you know, with COVID, with the pandemic, not being able to spend time with friends. Some of them, my kids haven't been in school for a year. You know, not being able to go to birthday parties and all of those things. So, you know, for me, I try to maintain some sort of a schedule here when I could. And, you know, we still go out and do things, but for the mindset, for the mentality, for the mom, what are some things that you're doing or that you could suggest that they do as well, just to help them? I mean, literally, for lack of better words, get through it, because we're almost there, I think.
Oh man. Right. I'm hoping so too. Yeah. So my kids need different things. And I think that's what's been the challenge as a mom, as far as helping them cope, right? Is that they need different types of interaction and space to feel like fulfilled in their lives. One of them is completely introverted and the other is completely extroverted. So obviously one of them has been affected more, you know, than
I have
the
two
other.
of those too.
Yeah. So, you know, my oldest is very much like, she could live in a house full of people her whole life and never have a moment alone, and that's where she would thrive, right? And then my youngest is more like, let me be alone forever. So right now, and I fall somewhere in the middle, right? So right now it's more just in a lot of ways, me just being there. Again, this kind of goes back to being open and verbal with like what we go through, right? Like giving language to our pain is more validating the fact that they are going through it right now, that this is just part of their life experience. And then asking them, what things could I do or could we do together to make this feel a little, even if it's just a little bit better? And then we take suggestions and we do those things as much as we can, whatever we can. I listen to them and what they need, and then we try to accommodate that, right? But sometimes we can't. You know, sometimes there are things that like we just cannot do those things for whatever reason, right? Whether it's just literally because of what's going on in the world or scheduling. Life is the most insane right now. Sometimes it's a no, and then when it's in that type of situation, I've had to, and this comes from my trauma, is that I can have the tendency, I don't love this about my parenting, but to try to like put a Band-Aid on something too quickly with my kids. Like, instead of just letting them process and feel, and like, if the crying session, I feel like it's going on for too long, I'll be like, all right, come on, like, let's get it together. And there's a time and a place for that, right?
Mhm.
But at this point, I feel like what's being asked of me is to let my children feel their feels in this time, and to just be there for
Oh,
that, for
I
them.
love that. I love
Yeah,
that.
so we do a lot of like laying on the couch and just feeling sad, and like being like, this is how I feel right now, you know? And that's not, it hasn't come naturally to me, honestly. And it's weird because I feel like I can do that with other people in my life, but when it comes to my children, for some reason, I'm like, come on, guys, like, let's go. And they're 5 and 6. So we're learning a lot about slowing down and being disappointed, and dealing with that by like actually letting ourselves feel sad or whatever it is that comes up, for
Oh,
all 3 of
yeah.
us.
I love that. Well, and for me, I started having my kids journal every day.
Oh, that's so good.
And I said, I want you to answer, there's 4 specific things I have in the journal. And, and it's like, what are you grateful for today? How do you
Mhm.
want your day to go? What are you going to do for self-care? And what's something
Yeah.
that you're going to do to work on? What's a goal? And I'm like, the goal can change. Another thing I constantly say to them is there's no right or wrong answer when you're doing those things, right? But
Yeah.
it's funny when you were talking about putting the Band-Aid on really quick, because as a mother, single mom, single
Yeah.
parent, you're working, you're doing your own thing, doing what needs to be done around the house, and then you have these humans that you're taking care of as well that, as you mentioned, have very different needs at different times. And
Yeah.
like, my son is 12 and he's already getting into the kind of teenager
Yes.
thing. He's my introvert, you know, and then, yeah, my daughter is like always, look at me, here I am, let's go do this,
Yes.
what, and so it is very different. I love it. I think I'll be radically honest. The only reason I love it, and I think I'm able to do it the way that I am, is because I had kids so much later.
Yeah.
So, because a lot of people forget, I'm 48. So I was 40
Yeah.
when I had my daughter, right? So my mom was, 18 when she had.
Yeah.
So it's like, there's a huge difference in that. And I remind myself of those things. I couldn't even imagine, but I love where I'm at now because I know that the way that I do handle those things. And that's why I started the journal, because I realized I can't coach my kids. I can't be a mindset coach to my kids, right?
Yeah.
I need them to develop that on their own. And you specifically said something earlier that really I wanted to touch on, which you said I validate it, right? I validate their feelings. But for me, I've even learned I'm trying to teach them to do that for themselves so they don't seek it in other people and get
That's
into
so good.
situations, because that's all I did when I was younger, was like,
That's so good.
love me, give me attention, because I wanted it so badly. And I
Yeah.
would take it from the worst people.
Whoever would give it.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I
That's
mean,
so good.
I referenced myself in the book, as a lost dog, like looking for a home, because that's pretty much, it's just like, if somebody paid me attention, I was like, okay, what do you need me to do?
Yeah. It's
You
so
know?
crazy that you say that, because um, I know bits and pieces of your story, but not in its totality. But I also had both of my children when I was 20. So within my 20th year, I had both of my kids, which to me is incredibly young. And I actually was pregnant with my first daughter, and I was listening to some talk show. I don't remember at this time, but it was on the radio. And this woman was talking about how she loves her children. She would never trade them for the world. But if she could go back and do something differently, she would have them 20 years later. And I was so furious listening to that, because I was pregnant. And
Yeah.
I was like, how dare you? Like, I want to be pregnant right now and have this baby. And I'm now in my life, I'm, 20, almost 28, and I have 2 little girls. And I understand what that woman was saying, right? Like, I know, like, if you could just press pause and do all of the growing that you could do in 20 years, and then have the same children, right? Like, it's not that they take away from your life, they've added to my life. But I understand,
Mhm.
that there's challenges that come with having your children young, because you are still growing up. I realize now that 20 is still a child. So 20, and I still feel a lot at this point in my life that I am still very much growing up. So it's those things, right? And the reason that I had my children so young is because I was in the same ways as you, I had two things going for me. I was a lost dog, but I also had a savior complex. So like, it was like, I need you to save me, but almost like wolf in sheep's clothing, except for it's like savior and lost dog's clothing. I don't know. It was like, please save me. But then I would come in and just try to like fix everyone.
Yeah.
Like it
Yeah.
was like, yeah, yeah. And so that's how I ended up getting into a marriage that was horrible for me. And I ended up like becoming a missionary in the Christian church, which ended up the organization we were working with was a cult. And so all of these things, giving up all of my hopes and dreams, dropping out of college, getting married, having two babies, and putting myself in these situations with like, it was like, I thought that I was doing the right things at the time because I was like, it was the first time I felt needed or something. And so I got myself into loads of trouble like that, looking for validation by what I had to offer to certain people in certain situations. And in return, I was really, I got nothing, just a whole lot of trauma and me giving my life away. So it's so good that you're teaching your children to validate within themselves and to take care of themselves. That one of the things on your list for them in the morning is, what are you going to do for self-care today? And then saying, what's your goal? Also, it's allowed to change. Is that you're giving them, you're showing them like what it's like to be determined and to have drive, but also giving them freedom to grow into themselves. And those are things that, I never had growing up. I'm learning now, I feel like.
Yeah. I mean, and of course, I didn't either. And I always remind everybody when I talk about this, I'm like, I had an amazing family, loving family, thankfully, my mom and her sister, my grandmother, my uncle, like they were a tight pack. I mean, they took care of each other, and, it was none of that. It was just, the same thing. They were doing the best they could and with what they had. I knew that there were some things that I wanted to end, like you mentioned. And, and you also said, I feel like I'm still growing up. And girl, I'm 48 and I'm still growing up. I mean, and that's the thing. I think everyone, you have to, another thing I learned this year was to give myself grace, right? That I lived all those years trying to be the fixer, trying to be the perfectionist. I wanted to be needed. Well, to be needed, you have to provide somebody with something that they're not doing on their own, or they're going to use you for, which is really what I was doing, was allowing myself to be, used. And then when they don't need it, they throw you away. Right.
Yes.
So there's just unraveling all of those things. And I was just constantly beating myself up. And that's why I realized I could never finish my book, because every time I would go to write my book, I was kicking myself in the ass so much.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, and I mean, like, I would go through literal emotional, I would call it an emotional hangover.
Yeah.
Because I would wake up the next day and just feel completely out of it. Like I'd been out partying all night and drinking. And then I would basically avoid feeling any of it then for quite some time, writing the book or talking about it. And I was doing the same thing with this podcast. So I started the podcast. Well, going back into my story. So this year was wonderful for me. And I know it was not wonderful for people in in a lot of aspects, but for me, I chose to use it to discover those things. Those are the things that I discovered in this, this last year, and that I have written on my bathroom mirror, and I have little notes everywhere to remind myself that, that's part of that process. It's like, I've failed, but I'm not a failure. Right.
So good.
I've done all these things, but that's not who I am. That's what I did.
Doesn't define you. Right.
Right. So finally kind of going through that, because people were like, who am I? And I was like, the truth of the matter is, if you're able to really define yourself and say who you are, that's why I love asking people that question. Then I think that in itself, you're limiting yourself. I don't really think anyone
I
should
love
ever know
that
who
so
they are.
much. Yeah.
Right. Because then
I actually, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Where do you go? Where do you go from there? So
yeah.
Go
ahead. Thank you for saying that, because I have been kind of dealing with that within myself a little bit. Like, I feel like I'm more familiar with my authentic truth now than ever before, but do I really know, like, exactly, like, if I could, like, write, one sentence, like, who I am, could I do that? I don't know. I honestly don't know if I could right now do that. But But do I feel like I have a good sense of like friendship with myself and self-love? Yes. But it's like people think those things are synonymous almost. Like you have to, in order to have a
Yeah.
relationship with yourself, you have to have like a definition of exactly what that is. And I just don't think that's necessarily true. And another thing that you're mentioning is reminding me of what I was thinking before we got on this afternoon about how I have been so hesitant my whole life, and especially now that I feel like I'm stepping more into the things that I'm passionate about and like wanting to do, like you were saying before, the impact that I want to make on the world or feel called to make. I put this pressure on myself that I have to be more healed or like more ready than I currently am to like do those things. And I know I'm not the only one. I know I'm not. And sometimes I'll have moments of being like, of really letting go of that. And it really doesn't hinder me. And then it'll creep back in. Like there's this voice that's like, what do you really have to offer? And sometimes it comes on like lower days or days where I'm like feeling less, or I'm having an emotional
Girl, you're
hangover.
preaching to the choir.
Yeah.
I totally get it.
Yeah, it's just like, thinking you have to have it all together before you have anything to offer. And I don't know, I just kind of wanted to say that. It's not true.
The cliche of, that your message is in your mess, right? The message,
Yeah.
just all of those things. And I think that, I know a lot of people saw the shift in me the last year as I went, all out this year. And I was like, I don't care what you think. I care about you as a person, but I don't give a fuck what you think.
Yes.
Don't.
So different.
Because I can't, because when I do that, there's no black or white, right? Or gray area. Because I'm a kind of all in or all out person.
Yeah.
So if I'm going to care about what everybody thinks about me, I'm miserable.
Yeah.
And the people that are in my life are equally making me miserable because they don't really care about me. They care about the fact that I'm kissing their ass or trying to, whatever I'm trying to do. But now I can say, like, I have I have a very small circle of people that I, can say, am I ride or die, right? That I know no matter what they've got me, I've got a small circle. And then I have kind of that additional circle that I've started to build, which I hope, and you and I've kind of briefly talked about this, but this is why I want to do these really different types of retreats for, obviously for women, because I want to talk about the trauma. And for me, because there was so much sexual trauma.
Yes.
And going
Me as well. Yeah.
So it's like, I just want to be able to peel that down, and not from the standpoint of the way a counselor, therapist, psychiatrist, would do, more from the aspect of, I want them to have gone through that process and they are healing, right? They're dealing with it, but it's how you do it. Because if you go to a retreat or you get around a bunch of other people that have been through those things, it's not always the right answer. And that's what people don't understand, because they haven't actually dealt with it. They're still living in it. They're still suffering. They're still running it through their head. That's what people don't understand. Pain is like that, right? You touch a burning stove, done, right? You hit your head, done. Suffering we choose because we're reliving and reliving and reliving and reliving.
Yeah.
And I that's one of my 7 spiritual laws of success with Deepak Chopra, by the way. It's just, it hits me all the time.
Yeah.
But going through and with women that, like, I feel like I can say I am one of those women now and say, it's not that I don't ever think about it. It's not that the thought doesn't ever pop up. It's not that I don't get triggered, literally. Like, someone can say something to me and it will take me back in a second to something so horrible. But the thing is, I choose to say to myself, there is nothing there.
Yeah.
You need to come back to now. There is nothing there for you. You have dealt with that. You have healed. So, I'm walking right back out that door. But I think that's what a lot of people that maybe haven't gone through that type of trauma,
right,
don't understand. And mine was downplayed and hidden and denied for so long, because the people that love me really didn't know how to help me deal with it. So they just didn't talk about it.
Right.
And I'm sure they probably blame themselves as well. And, all of those things. And so when I finally started unraveling all that and realizing how it was contributing, and I say extinguishing, because, I'm really big on fire and Phoenix and rising up.
Yes.
There are things you do that fire you up, and there are things that you do that extinguish, and you have to learn what those things are. Right. So for me, and it was like, just even feeling dirty, not feeling worthy because
Yeah.
those things were done to me out of my control.
Right.
I walked around not feeling good enough.
Yeah.
So, there's just so much to unravel. So we're getting pretty close to cut off time here, but I would like for you to just touch one more time on, who you want to collaborate with, what you want to start putting out there. I'm sure you're going to be back on here again at some
That
point.
would be great. Yeah.
And then also tell everyone how they can connect with you or where you want them to connect with you on the dub.
Yeah, I'd love to. Before I touch on those things, I was wondering, this is kind of crazy and weird, but before you reached out to me to ask if I'd want to join you on the podcast, I was kind of going through one of those like spiritually intense nights and was writing quite a bit. And I wrote this extremely short poem. But when you asked me, I was like, holy shit, no way. It's just how it mirrors what you're trying to do. I was wondering if I could read it for you quickly.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
Cool. So it says, she's beautiful the way she sets her soul on fire and lets her heart burn like brush to illuminate the darkness. It's uncomfortable how she melts in the heat of her own demands, but she knows that sacred fire is the birthplace of purity. So she will sit and burn to ash and see what is left remaining, a phoenix ready to rise.
Oh my God. Shut up.
I know. And then he reached out. I don't know if it was like the next day or the day after. And I was sitting there like, oh my gosh, it just was so crazy to me.
There's no coincidences.
Yeah. No. So cool.
I literally, I got into, I don't know if you know who David Meltzer is, but I've been in
No,
his,
I don't.
follow that amazing person. If anyone's listening to this podcast, follow that man because I searched and searched and searched for people in the business world that weren't businessy, if that makes sense. Yeah. I was so tired of their bullshit, gimmicky, I'm like, look, I am always a student. I can always learn, but don't treat me like I'm a dumbass, right?
Yeah.
And I love, with David Meltzer, it's like he has these pillars that and it applies to life as well. But one of the big things he's like talks about coming from gratitude, no matter what, which has literally, I'm not even, that'll be a whole nother podcast, but I'll just tell you that was part of the reason I have done so well in my shift in the business. And he talks about there's no coincidences. And I know that's hard to accept, right? I know that takes a little time with some people. For me, I accepted it right away because I wanted that shift. I'm always about shifting my mindset as long as if it aligns and it's healthy. If I'm triggered, obviously I do the discovery, but he talks about that. And since the more I've accepted it and the more I say it, and I say it to my business partner all the time, we like what you're just saying, these things pop up all the time. And I'm like, no coincidences.
Nope.
You put the energy out, it comes back. It really does. So.
It's true. Yeah. Well, thank you for having me. But yeah, I am. You are the type of people that I want to be collaborating with. But yes, it's the work that I'm doing in the world right now. Like I said, I'm a storyteller. So everything that I do is really intuitively creative. So I do, you can follow me on Instagram at Makenzie Jene. My handle is the same, and TikTok, and my YouTube actually is dropping this week. So just lots of meditation. For sure, I do guided meditations, and then just a lot of talking about things like this. And most of my passion and what sets my world on fire is leading people to love themselves and build relationship with themselves, to live authentically. And I think there are layers to that. And it's what my whole life, I feel like, has been teaching me, is how to stand on my own 2 feet as who I am and be proud of that, no matter what the world says, and love that expression of humanity. We have just like our thumbprint, like that's the mark that we leave on the world. It's different for everyone. And so coming into relationship with that is, and helping people to do that. That's what I'm here for.
Oh, love it. Yeah. I love it. Like I said, I feel so blessed that our paths, cross, like I said, coincidences. I mean, and it's a funny thing that people don't understand about social media is that when you start viewing certain types of content, some amazing people can come into your life if you'll stop following all the crap.
Let it go. Like,
right?
let it go.
Right?
Yeah.
So,
Declutter. Hmm.
if you when y'all watch the podcast, you're totally missing out on the facial expressions and the hand gesture.
It's so true. You're like,
I
I
like, "What
know.
Uh, so, well, thank you so much. Like I said,
Yeah,
I know I'll
thank
have you on again.
you.
I'm sure we'll be doing some. I see us doing a lot of things in the future.
That's
Getting
great.
some events together, and you guys go follow this woman on TikTok for sure. I love your TikToks.
Thank you.
And if you would like to be a guest on the show, just shoot an email to creatinganinferno@gmail.com. And once again, thank you. This will get pushed out in about a week. I come off the cuff. Everybody knows that I don't do a whole lot of planning with these. I like to go run with it.
It's
So if
awesome.
anybody has questions for you, I'm sure they'll reach out to you as well. I hope to see you on a lot
Great.
more podcasts.
Thank
You're
you. Thanks for
amazing.
having me.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, Brandy. Have a great day.
You too.
All right.
Bye.
Bye.